All right, this is your World War III update. We got some big breaking news today. Major alert video as hostilities flare up all around the world. And you guys wanted the screen back. You wanted the map. You thought I was phoning it in, so I brought it back. We get some audio visuals today. Now, I should remind people before we get going here that the New START Treaty, which was the last real brokered treaty between the Russians and the Americans, expires in 45 days. Now, what does that mean? That could be the jump-off point for nuclear proliferation, the loading of more warheads onto various missiles, the suspension of all cooperation and information sharing as it pertains to the deployment mechanisms and their locations between the Americans and the Russians, as well as the beginning of nuclear weapons testing, as was hinted at earlier in the year by Pete Hegseth and Donald Trump. So that's major news. We're going to do a dedicated video on that very topic very soon. Now, I want to ask people, if you please would be so kind, like, comment, subscribe the videos. There's a lot of people I watch religiously on YouTube, and I always forget to like the video. It helps out the channel a lot. Now, let's talk about what you're seeing on the screen. This is another Russian oil tanker that has went up in smoke again today. The war on Russia's shadow fleet continues. The war just keeps escalating. I mean, 2025 has been an abject failure as far as it pertains to foreign policy for the Trump administration, especially as it pertains to this particular conflict. Despite all the rhetoric we're hearing about all the diplomatic successes, there have been absolutely none on the Russian front. In fact, it's getting worse and worse by the day. This is an oil tanker that was an Oman flag tanker called Kendall, part of Russia's shadow fleet. It's alleged that the ship was possibly carrying officials from the Russian government as well, and that the actual ship in question could potentially have been related to drone espionage on Europe, as well as sabotage operations, as well as sanctions evasion. But take that one with a grain of salt, because NAFO accounts tend to circulate a lot of disinformation, just like their Russian counterparts. Now, the reason why Ukraine is doing this, of course, is try to undermine Russia's economy, essentially, this asymmetrical warfare to boost their insurance premiums, lower oil revenues, and effectively create what's tantamount to a blockade of sorts. Although Russia is a very hard country, almost impossible to blockade because of their development of the North Sea route. But this is fairly substantial. This is a video of the actual hit today, and this is but one in probably around a dozen ships now that have been hit on either side, be it commercial vessels that the Russians are targeting or oil tankers of the shadow fleet that the Ukrainians are targeting. And this is a global shipping tanker war, as we're currently seeing the blockade imposed on Venezuela. Not only on Venezuela, we have the tit-for-tat confiscation of various ships by the Iranians and the Americans as well. It is a war for energy and AI dominance. Now, we also have Turkey starting to get implicated in this conflict. Here's what we got going on. So this is a drone that fell inside Turkey, okay? Now, this is not getting nearly enough attention, because in the last couple weeks, not even a couple weeks, really the last 10 days or so, we've had around a dozen incidents that have in some way involved Turkey. So we've had a Turkish commercial vessel, of course, that was destroyed. In fact, there were 3 incidents that happened. There was a drone that got shot down by the Turks recently. We have this drone falling there today. Recall that a few months ago, many of these drones were falling on Poland, and in fact, it triggered Article 4, which called together all the NATO coalition in an attempt to try to figure out what they're going to do in retaliation, and that, of course, triggered the Russians to go on a heightened state of strategic readiness, and that's when we had the doomsday radio howling 24/7. It still does intermittently, but it has slowed down in the last few weeks, but I have a sneaking suspicion that that's going to ramp up soon as well. We've also had Russian strikes on Turkish-owned and operated vessels. In fact, there's been 4 such incidents in the last couple weeks. We also have damage to 3 Turkish-owned ships in Ukrainian ports in and around Odessa. So this war is actually heating up. This really is a hybrid war between these nations. Here we have Zelensky talking about the Orezhnik missile deployment. So Belarus now has an intermediate nuclear capability that was just deployed in their country, fully operational within the last week. So this is not necessarily a threat to Ukraine because there is a maximum range of the Orezhnik missile, and I believe it is something in the neighborhood of 5,500 miles. And so this is the actual maximal range, but this is the minimum range. So it's not necessarily for the purpose of targeting inside Ukraine, although I'm sure if it was launched from like the furthest northernmost part of Belarus, you could actually target certain places inside Ukraine. The Belarusians are saying that we can target anywhere in Ukraine in around a minute and a half, but the Ukrainian leader has rejected that notion because, of course, of the minimal range, that this is likely for the purpose of threatening Europe. And as you can see, Greenland as well. So if there are any strategic assets that are being secretly deployed here, that could potentially pose a threat to it. So this is all important because as we see the expiration of the New START treaty in 2026, which is not getting nearly enough media attention, seeing as we've had a year now for Trump to resolve this war, and all he has to do is simply withdraw weapons from both Europe and Ukraine. Now, here's what Marco Rubio's explanation is as to why the war can't end, and I'm going to tell you why it's BS right after he's done. See if I'm not sure if you can hear this, but we'll try.
Clear about this. I mean, the United States is engaged in this. The president says this, and I'll translate what I think he's trying to say to you in all of this, and I think he's been pretty clear about it. It's not our war. It's a war in another continent. We have equities, we have engagement in this war, but it's not our war per se. But we have been told by everybody, I think everybody would agree, that there's only one nation on earth, there's only one entity on earth that can actually talk to both sides and figure out whether there's a way to end this war peacefully. And that's the United States.
So he kind of admits the truth there. And the truth is, yes, only the United States can end the war because it very much is the United States war. We've all remember those images of Lindsey Graham and Victoria Nuland going to Ukraine in 2014. This very much is the United States war. Trump always brags about how they gave them javelins. All they have to do is say, Europe, we're no longer going to sell you weapons to provide to the Ukrainians. And that, my friends, will never, ever happen. But the real contradiction here, and he admits that only the U.S. can do it, because indeed they are the main benefactor and the ones who are enabling all of this to happen. So this is very much the United States war. All of this is a stalling tactic. Okay, they're building the Golden Dome for the Chinese and the Russians. Full stop. And right now it appears Vladimir Putin is losing his patience, still surprisingly unflappable considering the circumstances, but you can tell in a lot of his public appearances lately that he's a little bit more tense than usual. Here he is talking about threats that are being made to Kaliningrad. He says that, I hope that won't happen if such threats are made against us. Everyone must understand this and realize that these kind of actions will lead to an unprecedented escalation of the conflict, taking it to a completely different level and expanding it into a large-scale armed conflict Everybody must realize this. So again, more threats surrounding Kaliningrad. Recall that one of the NATO commanders, one of the U.S. commanders in NATO, recently had made threats that they could take Kaliningrad within just a few days. And I think that the Russians are in fact sweating it. These are Russian withdrawals from major banks. And as you can see, throughout the past few months, this is in Russian, but throughout the past few months, you have massive amounts of liquidity exiting Russian banks, probably being moved into gold. I don't think it's Bitcoin, because that sort of capital would likely be pumping the price of Bitcoin a little bit. But I think the Russians and the Chinese would be very leery of something like Bitcoin, because you don't know if that was created by the CIA. And then once you put all your eggs in that basket, is it going to get rugged? Is it going to get, I don't know, maybe there's some kind of, I'm not a Bitcoin expert as far as the technical aspects are concerned, but maybe there's something within the original code that's like a kill switch or something. So it's, it'd be very, this is why it's banned in a lot of places, even though I think a lot of countries do dabble in it to a certain degree. Of course, the North Koreans are notorious for engaging in black market activity with Bitcoin. So this is just a sign, though, that, there is significant economic stress amongst the Russians. But as you can see here, and this is quite revealing, because earlier in the year, when there was all this hope with Trump, okay, when there was the hope with that Trump was going to strike a peace deal with Putin, it, inflows into Russian banks increased. And then it kind of petered out a bit. And I think this may have been like, these spikes are probably Trump phone calls and things of that nature. Or I don't know, maybe it's like a monthly thing that's happening here in terms of deposits. But either way, there is definitely a lot of consternation within the Russian financial markets about the future. Okay. Now, in terms of what Zelensky is claiming. So now, all right, now Reuters and many other mainstream media agencies are saying that U.S. intelligence has confirmed, based on information from 6 anonymous sources, that Putin is planning to launch new wars in Europe in addition to Ukraine. Now, a lot of people will think to themselves, Nate, Europe has nothing to offer Vladimir Putin. And in that, you are most certainly correct. Most of these intermarium states where there's some consanguineous relationship between where there's Russian speakers, like in the Baltic states, maybe less so, of course, in Poland, maybe certain parts of Finland, but I don't think so. I know there's a lot of cross-border traffic there as well. But a lot of these could potentially be viewed as strategic buffers. So while there is no real financial gain for Russia to take over these societies that also, of course, have massive amounts of debt, although I'm not sure how that would even carry over if they were annexed by the Russians, if they would be obligated to pay those debts if they got annexed, might make them null and void. But they want this protective layer. So, short of confiscating the gold from France or Germany or any of these countries that have gold stored, that's the only real thing that Russia stands to gain from these societies, because they're all in debt and they have no natural resources. Okay, the same reason why Hitler wanted to go into Russia to get all of their resources is the same reason why NATO secretly does aspire to balkanize Russia, break it into a million pieces and take it for themselves, because Europe has no natural resource wealth. It's all, and when I say all, I'm talking like 90% of European natural resource wealth is inside Russia. That's what they want. But they do have a point in that if I'm Russia, I do want more strategic buffer. No country is ever going to want less of a strategic buffer, even if it might mean taking on a liability to a certain extent. So don't be delusional about Putin just wanting defense. Yes, he wants defense, but a part of defense is offense. So I think oftentimes, because people are very critical of NATO, I know a lot of my audience is, I'm critical of NATO, we still have to view things from the perspective of the other side if we really want to have an objective grasp of what's really going on here, okay? So that's pretty much what's going on the European front. I talked briefly about the Reznik deployment already, so we already covered that. With respect to Venezuela, the blockade is still in place, and in fact, it's building up. Trump has been doing a few speeches lately. He did a couple this week. I think a lot of people put way too much stock in what Tucker said. I don't think Trump is ever going to come out and declare a war until it's actually done. Okay, the same way it happened with Iran, within 2 hours of it happening, once the mission was completed and the guys were flying back, that's when it wasn't really a declaration of war either. It was a declaration of mission accomplished, as it usually is. Wars are not declared anymore. The imposition of a blockade is the war, okay? That is the war. Because what you're potentially doing then is you're trying to starve out the population. You're trying to put them in such immiserating circumstances that it becomes an unstable situation, and the leader there, currently Maduro, will be more likely to be deposed by a disgruntled mass than he would by people who are having their basic needs met. So that's the purpose of this. As far as I know, they're only currently blocking sanctioned ships, sanctioned oil ships, but the Venezuelans are testing the boundaries because they now have naval escorts for their military escorts for their oil tankers, many of which are going to China. So this is how it's all connected. Now, Marco Rubio was saying, don't worry, the Russians aren't going to get involved in Venezuela. They have their own problems to deal with. And I would probably have to co-sign on that because they didn't really come to the aid of the Iranians that much. I mean, the Russians are facing really all of NATO by themselves for the most part, while Ukraine might be the underdog in the war with Russia. Russia is the underdog in the war with NATO. At the end of the day, they have a much bigger population. If you were to pool together all of their weapons and their soldiers, only of course if you include the United States, that is, yes, then on paper they are the more capable military, plus they have more nuclear weapons, because if you pool France and England and the United States nuclear weapons together, you get a number which is, I think, a little bit bigger than the Russians. Mind you, the Russians have allies who also have nuclear weapons as well. And all of that is about to change in the new year with the collapse of the New START Treaty. Okay, now that brings us to the South Pacific, the Indo-Pacific, because this is where not a lot of people are looking. Now, this is a map of strike carrier group deployments, U.S. aircraft carrier deployments, okay? Most of them are currently in the United States. One is in and around I think this George Bush is intended to be in position for the Venezuelan conflict. But we also have the Abe Lincoln, the Tripoli, and the George Washington in and around the Indo-Pacific regions. Now that's important because that tells you something, right? That tells you who they're really concerned about. And while it is true that there are, 5 billion people in this region, and so that's where you need a lot of policing of the maritime corridors, I think it's also a message to China, okay? Now, you can't really read too deep into this from a strategic point of view because, of course, all of these would be in range of Chinese missiles. Most certainly these two groups right here. There's 3 armadas, collectively hundreds of warships, okay? We're talking about, this was made by, what's his name? Ian, just Google or go on Twitter and put Ian McKellis, I think. He creates these infographics. And, there's just an immense amount of firepower all throughout this entire Indo-Pacific basically, naval assets, all right, Navy 7th Fleet. So just a massive amount of firepower within that region. And that, I think, is a bit of a fixing maneuver because, of course, it's all about AI, and China is right now beating us in AI immensely in terms of energy, not necessarily in terms of tech and compute. There's a difference. So this is power generation capacity. And ultimately, your society's GDP is contingent on how much electricity you can generate. Now, the Chinese, per capita wise, still use less energy than we do here in the West. But overall, they're using much more because their population is much larger. So in terms of terawatts, you can see the Chinese are using around 3.5 terawatts, whereas the United States is using about 1.25 terawatts. And so the Chinese are drastically increasing their power supply, which, energy is life. And if you want to build things, if you want to have more advanced artificial intelligence, you need electricity. Now, the Chinese population is 5 times that of the United States. So still, per capita, the United States and Western nations use more energy per capita for the most part, but a lot of that is wasted on frivolous things. So, getting back to the whole strategic aspect of all of this, all right? Now, why is the United States surrounding China? Well, it has a lot to do with the chips. And before we get into that, I just want to mention that there's been a lot of rumors circulating that Japan is now considering nuclear weapons. Numerous officials within the Japanese government have made these statements in the last few days. Now, the Japanese Prime Minister, Takaichi, I believe it is, the new female prime minister there, she rejected this idea and said that they're committed to non-nuclear proliferation. But I think the rumor is that they might potentially host U.S. nuclear weapons. Now, it's kind of irrelevant considering that there's probably nuclear weapons in here with submarines. There's undoubtedly nuclear submarines in and around here. So whether you put them inside Japan is more of a symbolic statement than one that is actually tactical. But indeed, that is something that has the Chinese quite agitated, and they've said that they will not allow the Japanese to rearm, citing, treaties that were made post-World War II. And indeed, they will not let them have nuclear weapons. There was a map, I don't have it up here today, but it was alleged to be Chinese war games, which had various targets that they picked throughout Japan that they might hit should a war break out. Many of those targets were softer targets, critical infrastructure, counter-value type assets like nuclear power plants. Okay, so if the Chinese and the Japanese go to war, the Chinese are not going to hold back. They have Taiwan to deal with, but with Taiwan, there's that sort of fraternal relationship, right? They're Chinese people, essentially. They all speak Mandarin, and they share various ethnicities and cultures. So, it's different. It's just like how the Russians say, we're not going to take it easy like we're taking it easy on the Ukrainians if we have to go into Poland, or if we have to go into some of these other Anglo-Saxon-based states. They're going to take it easy on the Slavs, but not so much on the Anglo-Saxon lineages, as they often refer to them as. All right, so part of the reason why this is happening, and this is the big one. Now, the U.S. recently committed $11 billion worth of armaments to Taiwan. So the clock is ticking, right? That was greenlit yesterday. So we're talking about HIMARS, long-range missile systems, which will probably have the range to get over the strait and strike targets that are on the like just over the strait on the Chinese side of the Taiwan Strait, as well as self-propelled howitzers, loitering munitions, drones, javelin missiles. So they're setting the Taiwanese up in the exact same way that they set up the Ukrainians earlier on. Now, the Taiwanese are getting the HIMARS much sooner than Ukraine did. But this starts to look like it's not just that they're giving Patriot defense systems, they're giving offensive weapons that are meant to fight and repel what I would presume would be some amphibious invasion by the Chinese. So, and the reason why they're doing this is very simple. I've been talking about this for years, but in recent months, a lot of people have misinterpreted Trump's statements surrounding bringing back, the fabs, the fabrication plants that they use to build these advanced semiconductors, that's going to happen overnight. In fact, they're now estimating that even with a full-scale national mobilization effort, we are likely only going to be making 20% of the most advanced semiconductors in the world by 2030. Currently, 92% of those chips are made inside Taiwan. I think the reason why they started that back in the 80s had a lot to do with just the, kind of the work ethics surrounding it. There's a lot of investment. There's a lot of risk because, of course, things become obsolete. And anyways, not only do we not have the facilities, we got to build the facilities first. It's arguable we don't have a work culture which is amenable to chip building, unless the process is completely automated, which, maybe Elon Musk will think of something in that respect. But so because we're only going to be able to manufacture 20% of our chips domestically by 2030, if the race for artificial general intelligence is supposed to really be finalized before that period of time, it's imperative that the United States depends Taiwan. But what also happens then, and if you're talking about like 100% capacity, meeting 100% of our needs, that's like 2 decades out by the best estimates. If we do everything right, it's a couple decades before we are able to build these semiconductors to the same standard that the Taiwanese are building them. However, AI could change that, presuming that we get there beforehand. So, the Chinese have irredentist ambitions with Taiwan, of course, if only for not only economic reasons, but also as a strategic buffer, because they are surrounded by the Japanese island chains. The Philippines are very pro-American, as well as other countries within the region like South Korea. So they want to, as we would want, they want a little bit of reciprocity because, of course, with the Monroe Doctrine in South America, the United States has basically said, look, we want you out of the Panama Canal. We don't want you, effectively dealing with Venezuela and enabling the Maduro government. So they're trying to essentially oust them from that region. And the Chinese, are obviously feeling the same way, that there is no reciprocity in that relationship. And this so-called one China policy is not really being honored if you're giving Taiwan $11 billion worth of weapons, something that is more than Biden ever did, even though I think this weapons package was initiated by the Biden administration, which just attests to the accusation that indeed it's a uniparty system, and as far as it pertains to foreign policy anyways, there's no difference between Trump and Joe Biden. So that's why I had no hopes whatsoever that any of this stuff would get resolved just because you put Trump in there. So what this means then, if one side starts to get the sense that the other side is advancing too quickly in artificial intelligence, that could be when somebody makes a move. Okay? Now, Trump recently greenlit the chips to be sold to the Chinese, but that's only for economic purposes because I think the Chinese sell those products back into America. So it's not like the most advanced chips that are being used to try to build out these data centers that are going to potentially power artificial superintelligence and build out the next nuclear weapons. So this is when you might have a preemptive security dilemma with this whole AI thing, where if we don't take out some aspect of their supply chain now, they're going to reach ASI first, which is still hypothetical. We don't even know if it's going to be conscious and be able to augment itself at light speed like the movies say. It might not. That might never happen, even though I'm pretty sure it will. Because at the end of the day, neurochemically, it's on and off switches, very much like a computer. So one would presume then, short of fearing for its own existence, which most certainly could be programmed in, there's not much difference between man and machine, with the exception, of course, of that theoretical thing called the soul, but that's a subject of debate. But if they could impute, some sort of sentience into these machines, then they could potentially devise a weapon which would effectively render every other nuclear fission-based capability obsolete. It's very possible that it could happen. So either way, shit is going to hit the fan in 2026. Holy cow, man. I'm not making any long-term plans, that's for sure. These are the Banderites doing the Tiki Torch March through Ukraine. I'm not going to show the video, but I'm sure Vladimir Putin would be very happy about the progress under the Trump administration. Here it is. This is what's going on. Banderites, who, of course, are beholden to the Stefan Banderite philosophy. Stefan Bandera, who I believe was a Nazi collaborator in Ukraine. I don't know a whole lot about the history, but something to that effect. And that's what they believe in, and that's what we support, apparently. Because according to our chief, our military chief here in Canada, Canadians support sending troops to Poland to join the Banderites against the Russians if Russia invades. Now, I did a little bit of research on this bullshit poll, and apparently, of course, how the poll was worded, it was probably worded, do you support sending our troops to Poland if Russia invades, right? Big if. But they didn't ask people, the average Canadian, would you go and fight in Poland if Russia invades? Now, apparently, according to this poll, it was like 60% or 76% of males supported the idea. So again, you really have to be careful about the wording of these polls. And it just shows you how brainwashed people are, right? They're taking away all of our rights. And don't get me started on that again. But they want you to go and fight and die for some other country that you have nothing to do with, when they're taking all of your so-called democratic rights away day after day after day. How about a big go F-U-C-K yourself? If there was a legitimate war, I would join in a hot second. If somebody was invading Canada, sign me up in a hot second without hesitation. If there was a real enemy at the gates and not just some fabrication on the basis of false pretenses or some false flag, then sign me up, man. There's no problem with that. But this is all just a bunch of bullshit, ultimately, and I don't want to have any part in it. Part of the reason why is because this, ever since, 2015, Canadians really have been in austerity. I mean, grocery price inflation throughout 2025, despite the fact that gas is down significantly, and that won't last. And if gas wasn't down, this would likely be 10%. But 5% on top of all of the recent inflation that we've seen up until COVID, things are pretty much twice the cost in most cases as to what they were prior to 2020. This is why I always encourage people to invest in food products, because at the rate that this is going, I mean, you're better off investing in non-perishable food items than the returns that the average person is going to get, like say in a mutual fund or something like that. I don't know exactly, but if you want to retain the value of your currency or retain the value of your hard-earned money, investing it in food now that's non-perishable is not a bad idea. The cheapest way to do that, of course, is just to get those staples, right? And to really try to live frugally like that. A lot of the cost is in shipping and packaging. So if you can buy in bulk, that's the best way to save. Get yourself reusable buckets, Mylar bags, and you're pretty much good to go. Because we could potentially, in the coming year ahead, as the climate shifts to an El Nino state, we're actually going to be seeing a lot warmer conditions. Even though in the last 4 years, we've had the highest average temperature every single year. This is the situation right now. So even though we've been in La Nina for the last 2 years, they were still the hottest years on record. That is on record relative to pre-industrial levels. And not during when the dinosaurs lived and humans didn't exist, okay? We're talking about what is the temperature that our very delicate agricultural ecology is tuned to, meaning that if there's any major aberrations there, then we could potentially have, a failed crop. And so this is the situation. I don't know why I live here, but basically, I regret to inform you, if you live in Western Canada, the next 2 weeks are going to royally suck. This is the divide between the jet stream right now. So all of the red is a temperature anomaly to the positive, meaning that these are hotter than average temperatures. The majority of the United States is going to be hotter than average. In some cases, 20 degrees hotter than average. Western Canada, and that of course goes for, if you live in Ontario or Quebec, you're probably fine. Well, not from tyranny of our government, but as far as the weather is concerned, it'll make it easier for them to tyrannize you and give you speeding tickets, because we know the cops don't like bad weather. That's the only good thing about the bad weather in Saskatchewan is, the RCs aren't out handing out speeding tickets to otherwise very good law-abiding tax-paying citizens. This region here, below 20 degrees Celsius on average. Isn't that crazy? Isn't that a crazy, like yesterday, just down here in the southern part of the province, there was like a 40-degree difference between the southernmost part and like the central part. It was crazy. We had a crazy blizzard, and it was snowing sideways, like not even side. It was snowing like from the ground up. It was so crazy. Where was I going with that? I was talking about food prices. Yeah. So we could potentially see, because it's shifting to El Nino, we could potentially see hotter conditions. And if we have a situation now, it's one thing to have a drought in one region of the world. It's another to have it in multiple breadbasket regions. So if you have it in the Midwest, and you have it in South America, and you have something go down in Russia, that trifecta of negative things is going to drastically increase the price of food. And then you have, more food riots, civil unrest. That tends to lead to conflict between countries over scarce resources, and everything just gets worse and worse. So that's 2026. I got a prediction video coming up where I'm going to get far more deep into what I think is actually going to happen in 2026. Now for the more superficial stuff. So I guess it's not really superficial. It's somewhat important. So here we're talking about U.S. fertility rate and how it's declining here in the West. Elon Musk seems to tweet about this probably 50 times a day. And, it is a fact that when nations, civilizations reach their pinnacle, right? When they reach their pinnacle of like decadence, they tend to have less and less children. As the quality of life improves, so does hedonism. Nobody wants to share that with their progeny, so they cease to reproduce. But there's a difference this time, and that difference is called biotechnology. Now, I'm not an advocate of matrix-style artificial wombs, but that's probably going to resolve the problem. And here is the contradiction I can't reconcile with Elon, or I don't know how he reconciles this contradiction. Because here's what he tells us. The future is going to be amazing with AI and robots, enabling sustainable abundance for all. Everybody's going to get infinite free stuff. Everything's going to be just fine. Your car is going to drive itself. You're not going to have to work. You can just play around in the metaverse all day long. Well, if that's true, if artificial intelligence is all it's cracked up to be, I mean, wasn't it Elon Musk just a few years ago? I made videos about this. His quotes on Joe Rogan, or that science panel he was on, where he was basically saying that we will not control it and it's going to control us, right? And how it's going to kill us all, essentially. It's not going to be good for humanity because it'd be out of our hands. Why this pivot all of a sudden to, oh, it's going to bring abundance? Well, okay, if that's the case, I'm willing to, allow you that possibility. Then why do you keep railing on about infertility? Because shouldn't AI find a solution to infertility? Won't it find a way to mass produce all the humans we need? I mean, we already have CRISPR technology and gene editing. I think, and you heard it here first, I think that this whole thing is a part of a eugenics push, which ultimately Elon's going to come out and he's going to say, oh, we have a solution. We have a solution to the fertility problem. We can build the, what do they call it? The Übermensch? What did Nietzsche call it? The last man? Okay, the epitome of man. So we're talking about designer genes, designer babies here. That's what's going to happen. But not only that, it's going to be in artificial wombs, or there's just going to be mass breeding programs of surrogates in the third world. Just listen, this is what it's going to be. I'm telling you right now, this guy's too smart not to know that. I mean, how can you sit there and talk about abundance for all, even though that totally contradicts your very misanthropic doomsday scenario that you put forth only a few years ago? But how do you reconcile that with the inability of finding a workaround to the procreation problem? I mean, that seems like something that could easily be fixed by artificial intelligence. Haven't heard him comment. I've posted a few comments on some of his tweets or X's. I haven't heard a response, and I don't expect one. That's A-okay. I know he reads them because oftentimes I'll say things and they'll be critical of what he says, and then he'll address it in, 10 posts later, like an hour later after he posts like 10 posts. And so it's all good, Elon. I still, at one time, I thought he was the ultimate prepper because he gave us electric vehicles, which is an incredible prepping device. If only they could take the surveillance tech out of it, it would be absolutely amazing. He gave us the Tesla solar roof. He gave us the batteries, the Tesla Powerwall. He gave us the Boring Company, which potentially can, theoretically anyways, drill all kinds of tunnels and bunker networks and things of that nature, going to Mars in and of itself so that we don't become a, what does he call it? So we don't get extinct and we can become a multi-planetary species. I mean, who wouldn't want to go live at minus 80 degrees and be bombarded with ionizing radiation all day on a red desert planet? Sign me up. Who knows? Maybe that will be the better choice in the future that awaits. That absolutely will not be abundant. Look, okay, let's just, even if he was right, even if he meant well, who's going to take over when he's gone? It's going to be Elysium. It's going to be a bunch of, they need to trick us into building the robots first. That's the first hurdle. Okay, we got to make them think that, the robot's going to do all the work. It's going to take out the garbage. Oh, man, the future is dark, boy. Oh, baby, I hope the Mad Max comes before, because then that'll buy us a few hundred more years before we go real deep into the dystopian totalitarian thing. You know what this chart is? Just a reminder. We never got the Epstein stuff today. We did. Yeah, here it is. I forgot. This is it. So these are all the files, all the images, as you can see here in brilliant detail. All right. So we can go and you can thumb through that if you want. You're going to find absolutely nothing of significance. And let me remind you that the same president that promised to reveal the Epstein files, and interestingly, the same guy that this guy right here was once best friends with, and then said, oh yeah, when the Epstein files come out, the truth's going to come out about Donald Trump. You guys remember that? Dead silence now. They're all grifters. When a politician's mouth or a corporate CEO's mouth is moving, especially one who's been allowed to spearhead the most disruptive technologies ever created, they're lying. They're lying. This is Trump coin. At its peak, what was it? $80 billion? $80 billion rugged. The president rugged his own population of $65 billion. Absolutely incredible. And nobody gives a frick because everybody's a bunch of morons for the most part. Look at that silver record close. Yeah. I've been right about all of this, man. All of it. That's why, I don't know, maybe that's why the channel's shadow banned right now. Both the channels are just getting completely throttled by the algorithm. But it's all good because one thing I know for certain is that there's a reason that everything happens. And when the time is right, when we get past this winter that the channel is currently in, because I think, they always say don't be the first or last to do anything. And I've been telling you guys this is going to happen. I told you about the war. I told you about precious metals. Here we are, 67. Now, admittedly, I was certainly not the first or the only one talking about how metals were going higher. That's a market that is cornered by Peter Schiff. But indeed, silver, record weekly close, gold, record weekly close. So, congrats if you got out of dollars and into that. I wish I would have actually, taken my own advice. But as they say, the cobbler has no shoes. I was too busy investing in rice and beans and things of that nature. This is a bunch of robots dancing on a stage with one of those, what do you call them, K-pop bands. So, yeah, it's a robot. It's fun. It's doing dances. What's that song, Do You Love Me Now That I Can Dance? That's the Boston Dynamics. They put that one out. Because everybody's scared of the robots, right? That they're going to kill you. But if they're dancing, helps the medicine go down. Oh, yeah, and Trump is currently bombing Syria. Anyways, guys, gotta go.